Hello, and welcome everybody to another panel discussion on digital transformation in the European youth field. My name is Michele Di Paolo. I will be your host today, and I will be hosting together with our guests a discussion about digital sustainability. As you may know, this is part of a bigger project called Digital Transformer, a project created by Salto Inclusion and Diversity and Salto Participation and Information. And on behalf of the project team, I would like to immediately pass the floor to Maya Drobne, our project coordinator, to say a few words of introduction. Maya, please.
Thank you very much, Michele. From our side as well, so as Michele said, Salto Participation and Information and Salto Inclusion and Diversity gathered the forces to open the important topics of digital transformation. So we are trying with different series of the 6 panels, online trainings, and as well 2 residential trainings to address different aspects of digital transformation, everything from digital rights, digital well-being, digital sustainability today, and of course like inclusion and participation, which are in very core of the whole project. So not to I think get the important speakers which we have today with us will show you as well the importance of digital sustainability. So welcoming you on this panel and giving the word back to Michele.
Thank you, Maya, again. And so let's discover together who are the speakers for the day. We have a little presentation to show you. Thanks also to Laimonas Ragouzas, which is doing the digital facilitation in the backstage. And here we go. We will discuss digital sustainability today together with Kati Wiese. She's an ecofeminist. She works for European Environmental Bureau as a senior policy officer for economic transition and gender equality. She's working on economic transition policies, advocating for a feminist economic system centered around care and well-being for planet and people. Previously, she has been working for different renewable energy development projects in West and East Africa, and as a technical consultant for a social impact consulting firm in Berlin, Germany. She has been investigating gender impacts of environmental policies in the Global South and Europe, publishing scientific articles on that nexus. So, Kati, and we will also have Chris De Decker. He's the author of Low Tech Magazine, an online publication that refuses to assume that every problem has a high-tech solution only. He wrote for the Demand Center at Lancaster University in the UK, which researches energy demand in relation to social practices. He's the co-founder of the Human Power Plant, an art project that it's investigating the possibilities of human power production in a modern society. And he was reporting on cutting-edge science and technology as a freelance journalist for newspapers and magazines. He was born in Belgium and now lives in Spain. And last but not least, we will have Jerry McGovern. Is an author. He published 8 books, and his latest one, The World Wide Waste, examines the impact the digital is having on the environment. He developed Top Task, a research method which helps identify which truly matters to people. And the Irish Times has described Jerry as one of 5 visionaries who have had a major impact on the development of the web. So, all these 3 profiles, of course, matches perfectly the topic of the day. We can now close the presentation here. And before starting the conversation with our guests, I would also to introduce another member of the team today, Dace Anderson. Hello, Dace. She's ready there with her iPad to do the graphic recording of the day that then will be shared later on as a summary of the discussion that is going to happen in a while. So thank you, that's already, and we will get to you at the end of the discussion to see what's happening on that iPad at that moment. But now it's time to bring up on the screen all our panelist guests. Here they come. Perfect. To start discussing digital sustainability with them. And yeah, I'll start exactly from our big topic and main topic, because I have the impression that this topic is not one of the most debated ones, honestly. So I would start asking your help to define what are we talking about, basically, when we talk sustainability in digital spaces or anyway connected to activities involving the digital sphere. Which aspect should we consider more? What should we pay more attention at in our youth work practices, of course, as a starting point, for instance. And yeah, it's the same question for all of you. So I would leave the floor to Kati for kicking off the discussion today. Kati, please.
Thanks a lot. Thanks also a lot for having me. I'm very happy to be part of the discussion. I mean, yeah, you already introduced myself. So I'm Kati. I work for an environmental organization based in Brussels. And I mean, how we also see it, I mean, digitalization is really this big promise of our time, and is expected to have like very profound but also transformative effects on the economy, society, but also the planet. And we already see how digital technologies basically have already kind of influenced and changed the way we live and work, travel, communicate, but also relate to each other. And what's also in the EU bubble, because I work on EU policies, digitalization is always framed as having this like huge potential to solve environmental problems and challenges. But what we see now is that it hasn't really lived up to the promises. So if you look at the different stages of the digitalization process, GDP, but also energy consumption and greenhouse gases have actually grown worldwide. And I think in general, I feel like there's not currently assessment of the environmental or social impacts from digital services and technologies at the EU level, nor what the impacts actually could be if we increase our dependency on tech, which we cannot stop anyways. And I think this is also connected to the general lack of data or understanding of what the exact environmental and social impacts of the digitalization actually are. Because there's no doubt that the production of digital infrastructure, so when we think about laptops or computers, etc., are actually dependent on the exploitation of our natural resources in Europe, but also beyond. Why we are already overshooting planetary boundaries. For example, for me, it was quite astonishing that the mining of cryptocurrencies, which is also kind of an increasing trend, is very energy intensive. For example, it's estimated that to operate the entire Bitcoin network across the world requires 7.46 gigawatt per year. And if we put this into perspective a little bit, this means that the energy necessary for one Bitcoin transaction could actually power the average US house for 70 days. So it's really, really huge. And what does it tell us? It tells us, and I think that's also relevant when we talk about sustainability, but also here for engaging with youth on the topic, is that we need a more holistic and also nuanced approach to the digitalization, because digital tools are not inherently good or bad, but I think it's the way they're being used and directed right now. And if we redirect our practices, policies, etc., I think they do have a lot of potential to foster sustainability when we think about knowledge sharing or sharing goods, etc., in a digital space, or also when we think about prosumerism, so the fact that decentralized energy production is actually made possible by the digitalization of the energy grid. And I have 4 points which I think are interesting aspects to consider when thinking about, okay, how can we leverage this potential? So one is the focus on sufficiency, because what we see right now is that a lot of digital tools are actually designed to increase productivity so that we can consume and produce more products. But digital tools could also, for example, used when we think about agriculture to minimize fertilizers instead of just enhancing production. And I think what we also need are practices. So how can we make sustainable or foster sustainable behavior in the digital space? So here I think about, how can we make sharing of goods and services more attractive than the physical good as such? And I think a problem right now is also that often the sharing services are more expensive than maybe owning your own drilling machine, etc. Then another point I want to make is the substitutions. So I think digital tools can actually have a potential if they actually replace the physical good. So what we see often is that the digital tools just are just an add-on. But if I think about video conferencing, for example, it should actually replace the travel that we would do otherwise. Another important thing I want to mention is also the infrastructure that we have. So we need to reduce actually the environmental impact of the laptops, computers, etc. So how can we ensure the products have a longer life cycle can be repaired, etc. So these two also need to go together. And a last point I wanted to make, I think it's also very important to think about like who is actually developing technologies, as the market right now is heavily dominated by a few big players who also have a lot of power. So what about actually also thinking about open source or cooperative business models that are targeted towards social and environmental goals instead of just profit maximization? So maybe I would, leave it here for now.
Thank you very much, Kati. Yeah. 4 points, all of them very interesting and relevant. I would go on with our guests to see if there are more elements to be taken into account or any specification or way to frame better these elements or add even more to the list. So I would pass the floor to Chris to hear from his perspective and his side as well. What are we talking about when we talk digital sustainability? And again, if these 4 elements are enough to frame it, or if we need more, and which one this more could be. Chris, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Well, so indeed, we have been told, the internet was sold to us as a kind of sustainable alternative for many physical things. And I guess that's the reason why many people actually think that is the case, and they're not really aware of the high energy use that is behind it. But of course, the infrastructure, like any other modern technology, it's based on a massive infrastructure, a lot of resource use, and that is now becoming more clear. I think more and more people are aware of that. But what bothers me, or what I think is problematic, is that people think we're going to solve it with just adding renewable energy to the mix, or we just power the whole thing with wind turbines and solar panels, and then it's solved. But I think what is very important to address the energy use of the internet is that we look at the trends that are causing the energy use to increase continuously. And what I learned is that there's at least 3 of these trends. First is that the content on the internet is getting heavier. Like just in real life, if you have to transport something from one place to another, the heavier it is, the more energy you're gonna use. So the average website in just 10-year time became like 3 times heavier, and on the mobile even 10 times heavier. The second trend is, of course, that we are more and more online. I mean, 20 years ago, we had internet, but you had to use a dial-up connection, and you were basically tied to your desk. And now, we're connected from the moment we get up until the moment we go to sleep, thanks to wireless computers, wireless internet connections. And then third, you have the whole capitalism working behind the screens in the form of cookies and advertisements and trackers, and which also causes a lot of data traffic that's actually not even about content. It's just about making money with the internet. So those trends need to be addressed, I think, when you want to solve the problem. Of course, renewable energy is part of the problem, part of the solution, but it has to go together with what Kati said, also sufficiency. That's how you could summarize it. And since I'm writing on say low technologies, kind of sustainability, and doing it through a website, I also in 2018 we made a solar powered website that actually addresses these trends by basically going back to the early 90s and taking inspiration from the websites that were built in those times, which were by definition energy efficient and very low energy use, because we had very slow internet connections and much slower computers. Yeah, I think that's for a start.
Thank you very much, Chris, also for introducing other elements, other topics to be taken into account, platforms, surveillance capitalism from one side, and green renewable energy sources from the other side. Then I would pass now the floor to Jerry from his side as well. Ideas and definitions and information to help our audience to understand better what are we talking about when we talk about digital sustainability. We heard already a few points. Let's see if we can add more, or anyway get more insight about what is already on the table, or better framing, or other comments. Jerry, the floor is yours, please. I'm afraid you are muted still, so maybe you have to...
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, there you go. Don't worry.
Thank you. So digital is physical, and it is incredibly material intense. A typical smartphone can have up to 70 materials in its actual makeup, and hundreds of chemicals in the manufacturing process. The amount of mining for a smartphone can be somewhere between 60 to 90 kg, just to get 130 grams of an end product. The CO2 in the manufacturing process for a smartphone is somewhere in the region of 60 kg. It can take 14,000 liters of water to make one smartphone, and we've made 15 billion smartphones since 2007. So digital is a very, very materially intense environment. The cloud is on the ground. The cloud is made up of 70 million servers. Each one of those servers cause somewhere between 1 and 2 tons of CO2 to manufacture. So we've got very, very materially energetic and pollution intense activities going on behind the scenes. So if there's something that we can do, that we can all do to try and address these problems, I mean, essentially they need to be addressed at a policy level and a governmental level. So the best thing would be to become an activist in the area. But on a personal level, we could look at holding on to our devices as long as possible. So the longer, if for materially intense devices, the longer you keep them in operation, the less damage you're doing to the overall environment. So we should be aiming to have phones that last for 10 years and laptops that last for 20 years in the process. So try and get your phone repaired. Try and get involved with repair cafes if you've got technical skills. Make it fashionable to have an old phone rather than fashionable to have a new phone. Let's celebrate things that are old rather than constantly obsessing about having things that are new. So hold on to our physical devices as much as possible. And then from the data side, let's hold on to our data as little as possible. Let's clean up, let's delete. Currently, there's something like 9 trillion photos stored in the cloud. Now, 9 trillion photos allows you to take a photo 1,100 times of every man, woman, and child on this planet. 9 trillion photos. We took more photos in 2019, 1.4 trillion photos in 2019. We took more photos in 2019 than we took in the entire 20th century. And the vast majority of things, whether they're photos or other videos that we take today, a couple of months later, they will never be accessed. 95% of data is not accessed 3 months after it is first stored. So we are the generation of digital waste. They're not data centers, they're data dumps. And we really, really need to start cleaning up the digital mess that we create behind ourselves. So hold on to devices as long as possible and get rid of that data as quickly as possible. And even better, don't take that photo. Instead of taking 10 photos, wait for the right moment where you get the good photo rather than clicking.
Thank you very much, Jerry. Also for these impressive numbers. Hearing these kind of numbers is also a very easy way to figure out the scale of the thing we are talking about. And this thing that we are not talking about digital archive, but talking about digital dumpsters. I guess it will stay with me for quite a while. We're getting a comment from Zoe from Tripolis, Greece. She wrote, she was thinking also about child labor and other unsustainable human labor apart from the environmental impact in manufacturing devices and so on. So maybe this is something we can also say something about in the next round of questions, which is, I would say, starting now. If you are not getting any more comments from our audience, because I wanted to go a bit more into the specific of your experience, everybody. So maybe starting back exactly from Jerry, I want to read, Jerry, the introduction to your last book, Worldwide Waste. I have here a few lines of the introduction, which says, "Every time I tweet, do a search, check a web page, I create pollution. Digital is physical," as you just mentioned. Those data centers are not in the cloud. They are on land in massive physical buildings packed full of data centers and packed full of computers hungry for energy. It seems invisible. It seems cheap and free. It's not. Digital costs the earth. So yeah, we definitely need more awareness about this. What can we do right now to increase this awareness from one side and reduce the footprint of our digital behaviors? Maybe starting from our little field of youth work and non-formal education, and what is too big maybe for individual behaviors and should be addressed like more systemically. Jerry, I will leave it to you, and of course, if our other guests want then to step in and comment, feel free to do it. Please, Jerry.
Yeah, I think we need activism. I did an interview a couple of months ago with a scientist from Canada called Josh Lebowski, who's a materials scientist and particularly focused on digital materials. And as that person said, in Greece, a lot of these materials are mined in Bolivia or in the Congo or otherwise, and with child labor and horrible conditions. And I asked him at the end, what were the things that he would recommend that we should do to get to a better place with digital. And the first he said was not within our control of ordinary people so much, but it was more at the policy or scientific level. And it was material simplicity, that we need to design products with much simpler and less materials, because the more materials you add to a product design, the more difficult it is to repair it, and the more difficult it becomes to actually recycle it. But the second thing that he said was in our control was to actually become activists. That he said he's also a historian, and he said most of the great positive changes in human societies are due to activism of citizen activism, whether it is voting, whether it is healthcare, whether it was seat belts for cars. It was not driven by the companies. It was not driven by the politicians. It was driven by citizen activists. And I think we need a lot more young people becoming aware and becoming active. There's a big movement at the moment now called Right to Repair. That is getting set up in many, many cities and many countries around the world. And if you've got some technical skills or organizational skills, start getting active and organizing your friends about repairing your phones and holding on to your phones another year longer, 2 years longer, or asking, going in as a group and asking for phones that have a longer warranty on them. If we start asking, not so much as individuals, but as groups, then the brands and the politicians will start listening. So I think we need a lot more youth citizen action in the digital sustainability space.
Thank you very much, Jerry. I don't know if Kathy or Chris have comments to or anything to add to what Jerry answered to this topic. Yeah, feel free really to step in and add some comments to whatever you hear from the other guests. This is how we want to do it today. Otherwise, I'm going to ask now to Chris our specific question that we prepared for him. So we know and we heard numbers more and more that heavier content, as you were mentioning before, Chris, increases emissions and so the carbon footprint and everything. We also know that surveillance capitalism platforms are promoting, as you said, as you mentioned, a lot of data exchange just for the sake of extracting, as they say, information for themselves to profit on. So how we could address these issues and maybe other issues from a low-tech point of view. You are the author of this webzine. Can I use the name webzine, which was the fashionable way to call it probably too many years ago, but called low-tech, exactly. So how can we use a low-tech approach as much as possible, thinking about, of course, youth work and non-formal education as a starting point, but of course, also getting wider in our consideration. How a low-tech point of view could help us in addressing these issues and more issues connected to digital sustainability. Which would be your recommendation, Chris?
Well, I think the software is very important. So what Gary says, of course, it's a problem in itself, the fact that our devices are not lasting long. And that's not just a problem with smartphones. It's with washing machines and cars, and everything is designed to break quickly. But with internet, there's another extra aspect, and that is that why do we change our laptop or our smartphone every few years? Because it's getting slow. It's like it's not handy to use anymore because everything is getting slow. But why is it getting slow? Because everything is getting heavier. And so what drives actually the constant replacement of devices is this fact that the software gets heavier and heavier. And so if you want to stop this huge waste of devices and the child labor in the mines and stuff, you have to actually focus on the software more than on the hardware. Everything that Gary said about repair is true, but by itself, it's not enough. You have to address the software issue, or people will be forced to switch device anyway. Another thing that is kind of more a remark to the earlier what discussion is that the systemic issues, like what you see, what governments are doing in Europe, for example, is actually pushing us onto the internet and pushing more and more daily services on the internet. So one of the trends now that is on their way is, for example, the digitalization of money. So we have cash, which is a very low-tech means of payment, which is thousands of years old. And the plan is now to replace it by digital money. But again, you are something that works perfectly in the real world. You're gonna move it towards the internet, and you're gonna add a lot of energy use. And not just that, it's also a very vulnerable system. If the data center breaks down, if there is somewhere a technical problem, you cannot pay anything anymore. So it's really that push from governments, and in Europe it's as strong as in the US, towards increasing digitalization that somehow should be stopped and even reversed, because I think part of the problem is designing more, say, lightweight software, lightweight applications. But another part of the solution is also to take things back from the internet into the real life. And money is one problem, but yeah, well, anything like from dating apps to Facebook, and because of course Facebook, Instagram, all these things are also kind of substitutes for person-to-person communication. And I think we all know that, yeah, people are very much connected through their phones, but when you sit on a train, then everyone's connected with someone else far away, but not with each other. So nothing that the internet does is actually critical to have a good life, because that would suppose we did not have a good life 20 years ago, and yeah, life was okay in the 80s and the 90s. So, but yeah, I think many things could become much more lightweight, but that kind of supposes another economic system, because now, of course, why are apps so engaging? Why do we get addicted? Because there are commercial motives for us to be on Instagram the whole day. And while you could design, it was said earlier, you could design similar apps or networks that are not designed to be addictive, and then it may not be. I mean, I think the internet has indeed a real potential to save energy, but it's not how we use it. That is more so in itself, I'm not against digital technology or the internet, but we are making a mess out of it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris. We are getting a few comments that I'm going to share with you later on. I don't know if there were some comments from your side, Kathy or Jerry, about what Chris was sharing. I could hear some. Yes, please.
Sorry. Yeah, I think I also mentioned in the beginning, I think we all three agree also that like what Chris just said, I think digital tools are not just good or bad, but it's still in the growth paradigm right now. So it's still as part of an economic system that it's, for me, targeted towards GDP growth at all costs, and then leaving environmental and social aspects as externalities. Whereas I think we need a system, or we need to make digitalization like fit for a post-growth society, as high growth rates are anyways a relic of the past due to the planetary boundaries, but also other factors. So I think we need to have an open discussion in society. Okay, what does digitalization mean, and how can we create it in a sustainable way? So I also made me think again what Chris just said, that actually governments right now are really exactly pushing us in the opposite direction, and also perpetuating existing inequalities of, I don't know, old people maybe not really don't have the necessary skills to now do their bank statements, but then I'm also from a village, there's not even one bank anymore. So what does it actually also mean for certain parts of society, and how will this maybe even also perpetuate the divide between rural and cities?
Thank you, Kathy. We're getting quite some comments about this topic, and I will share them with you all in a while, but then I will stay with Kathy for a specific question to her. We were mentioning your area of expertise, gender equality, economic transition, gender impact of environmental policies. It's very interesting. It would be very interesting for me to know more about it, just as I hear it. But then I would ask you especially to help us use this kind of perspective to look at the impact of digital transformation and to help to understand what would we notice then, assuming this point of view of, for instance, a gendered perspective towards sustainability or anyway digital transformation. Kati, please.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks. I mean, for me, this is also connected. So, if we want to achieve a sustainable transformation of the digital transformation in a holistic way, that also means that alongside environmental concerns, we also need to consider social and gender justice aspects. And I think that's also been mentioned by Zoe. Like, what about like the human rights aspects or the working conditions, etc. And I think that this is really not happening right now. I think we're still in this kind of silo thinking. So sustainability is mostly green, but actually sustainability and we already in school had this like kind of Venn diagram is about economic, social, and environmental aspects. Because if we, I mean, the digitalization is said to have like this immense potential for environmental protection, but then also there are also many studies say, oh yeah, it will also empower women and vulnerable groups, etc. But the reality is right now that to a large extent, because the digital sphere operates in the same system that we see in the real life, is kind of perpetuating existing patterns of gender equality, because the digital economy as it's now designed fails to actually break the patriarchal structures of our current system. And what do I mean by patriarchal structures? Is this belief or ideology that men are superior to women, and also a society where masculine connotated values are the predominant ones. And I think we do see examples of this. So when I think about the digital gender divide, due to still persistent social norms, but also gender stereotypes, prevents actually many women from even accessing internet or education, etc. And that's, we can see, for example, that in the science and technology sector, there's still I think 8 out of 10 jobs in the sector are actually held by men. And the lack, I mean, as participation is also always key, the lack of women in these sectors also then leads to the fact that robots or algorithms are predominantly designed for a certain part of society, and this is at the moment still white men, and this then also again perpetuates stereotypes and patriarchal values. I think what's been maybe a bit known as an example were the autonomous cars, where the algorithm was fed basically with a certain part of society, and then maybe the car would actually then not stop when there's a black woman, or for example in case of an accident. So I think this is a very important point. And another point I wanted to mention is that studies also show that the promise that digitalization will improve the work-life balance of women through teleworking and digital devices has not been fulfilled, because of the fact that women are still responsible for most of the care work. And I think this has also been very, again, sadly highlighted during the COVID pandemic, whereas also often it fell on women, the care work. So what can we do to break this? Again, I think, first of all, it's a new economic system, but then also the need to really radically restructure the digital economy, so that the governance of our data and also the architecture of our digital devices can actually enable sustainable but also democratic and gender and social just societies. So one point, I think it's really important, like we have to integrate gender and social justice aspect into environmental and digital policies. So we need to mainstream it. It needs to be kind of on top. It's not happening right now. We need to make the digital space also safe. So the governance of our data must actually be done in a way that protects and promotes women's and human rights, and prohibits data business models that actually violate the privacy and the autonomy of all of us. And there are a lot of like business models now that they even profit from sharing misinformation. And I'm coming back to my previous point. I think also, like, how can we actually help big tech companies accountable? So they also need to actually pay their fair share of taxes. They need to implement social protection measurements, etc. And there also need to be actually commitments to address the gender biases that we see now in our tech design. And I think another important aspect is also, okay, how can we actually close the digital skills gender gap? And here I also think it's important to also focus on the empowerment of young people or young women. So on the one side, I think, yeah, we need to, or there needs to be discussion, okay, what's happening now in the digital space and what are the risks? But then also, and it, I think comes back to Jerry, who said, okay, we also need more activism, but then maybe also to discuss tools, how can we empower these young people to use the digital space in a way that favors and empower them, and yeah, could also be potentially used for activism, for example. So I think these are is also a very important point I wanted to highlight.
Thank you, Kathy. I guess you meaning you audience of this discussion should be getting in the comments a few links referring to all the different resources that either Kathy and Chris and Jerry mentioned in their different comments and speeches. So yeah, here they are coming, and more to come and to share. So also maybe be sure to open those links and have a look there for what you can find. Maybe save them somewhere, and be sure to go there and use them, not leaving there to get digital dust and increase the digital footprint of online archives, as we just learned. I was mentioning quite some comments, so let me try to summarize what's happening in our comment section. Some comments that can also become easily questions, especially addressing digital behavior in education. So for instance, Alessandra commenting that what is missing is the awareness about the impact of our digital behavior. So this is linked with digital education, which is something we are trying to define these days, but it's still widely missing. So for instance, as an example, is still Alexandra commenting, when designing a youth work activity, a youth worker normally should assess the green print of the activity. So try to reduce paper waste, food waste, and so on. But then in the same way, now we understand that a youth worker should be able to carry this assessment when preparing a digital youth work activity, because we are still in the presence of the same values. And I'm afraid this is not happening at all. More comments we are getting are to the topic of creativity, which has been connected to the wide availability of media and the possibility, for instance, to stay in your examples, to take trillions of pictures and be prosumers and so on and so forth. Then we should probably find a way to keep the creativity while trying to reduce somewhat the activity and the production of media, and where to put the balance and how to achieve this could be an interesting question to ask you all on behalf of our audience and listeners. Is anybody willing to say something about this? How can we find a balance then between creativity expressed by digital means and media and the impact we are now learning about? Is it a topic that we need to probably invest more on? And then how we would recommend that a youth worker could talk about this topic with their young people groups, for instance, in the activities they design. I'm sure quite some youth workers are now listening to you, so it would be a very nice comment and a bit of knowledge to share with them if you wish. Is there anybody which willing to say something?
Yeah, I think. Sorry,
please.
It may be useful to make a distinction between digital technology and the internet, because you can do a lot on your computer without going online. We kind of forgot that, also because many software is now online. So instead of using the text processing software on your computer, you now go to the online version, and yeah, that's a bit ridiculous, because your computer can perfectly do that by itself. And if you look at digital technology in itself without being connected to the internet, well, that's already a whole different story, I think.
Super. Thank you also for being very practical in your example. That could be really something that we today can start to do. I don't know if our other guest, Kati, Jerry, has any other suggestion to give to our audience regarding this topic of how to keep the balance between online activities, or anyway digital activities, and creativities from one side. And the other topic which popped up as I was mentioning is how to shape a digital education able to tackle the digital behavior in terms of reducing the footprint as well. This could be another interesting topic to comment on if you have anything that you are willing to share with us. Is there any? Yeah, please.
Yeah, I think we need to separate creation from creativity. Creation is not necessarily creativity, and we've become great at creating things, but maybe not at true creativity in many senses. So really thinking more and doing less, maybe discussing more and doing less might be a very appropriate way. We don't need to create 1.4 trillion photos every year. You know, we're not really capturing the quality when we go for the quantity in most situations. So being slower, slowing down, and in many situations, the solution is not digital at all. I mean, we know that the solution to climate change involves much more human behavior than technological behavior. We need to walk more. We need to get on a bicycle more. We don't need electric vehicles. We need bicycles. I mean, we're not going to solve the climate crisis by giving everybody an electric vehicle. Electric vehicles are 4 to 5 times more materially intense to manufacture than traditional vehicles. So, you know, stop believing the overconsumption hype of the big tech brands, because all they want us to do is consume, 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 and stop being dragged into that world that Facebook has built, that Google has built, that Apple has built. Facebook and Google are advertising companies. That's how they make 90% of their revenue. Should always remember that. They're advertising companies. And the whole drive of digital today is overconsumption. So if we could reduce production and consumption, we could do a lot of positive things.
Thank you, Jerry, for your comment. Also getting some thanks to you in the comments as well. Zoe is thanking you as well. Okay, I don't know if there are other comments that you want to share. Otherwise, I have a kind of a last question for you, which is again very practical and would sound like this. Let's try to build a list, like a bullet point list of elements, of attentions, of suggestions that we should keep in mind from now on. We, meaning we as a community of educators, youth workers, people active with young people. So most of our audience now. Yeah, a bullet list of, as I said, suggestions, point of attention, behaviors that we should all try to embrace and keep in mind as much as possible. I guess many of them were already there, so I would ask you the last effort to put them really in a list. So maybe someone can start, and then we see if we can add more and in which order. I was thinking about giving the floor to Kati as the first one. So we go back to the original order. So let's build together this bullet point list of elements that we should really keep in mind to address digital sustainability in a proper way in our field of youth work and in the digital transformation happening to the youth field, according to your different experiences and opinions. Let's try to highlight, I don't know, 2, 3 suggestions for each of you so that we can create this list that will then be shared with our audience and hopefully with the whole community. Kati, I would ask you to start. I don't know, it's a bit of a difficult thing to start this kind of activity, but I'm sure you can
yes. I think it also nicely leads to the previous discussion already in the chat, right? So what can we actually do? And I think so. I had like 3 thoughts. I think the first one is, what can you do as in your youth work? I mean, you can educate yourself. You can raise awareness on certain things, and then there are a lot of like great studies that actually shed light on gender and digital aspects, inequalities, but also on what is a sustainable digital economy and where is it going now. So I think there are already some of the links in the chat. Another point I also was also thinking maybe to add in the previous discussion was we can also actually start by choosing tools that are not the big tech. So we could use, for example, as a search engine, we could use Ecosia instead of Google search, or there also we could use Posteo for emails instead of Gmail because of the data issues that Jerry and Chris mentioned before. There are also other alternatives we can make young people aware of. So I think there's even one an alternative to Airbnb, for example. I think it's called Fair Airbnb or something. So I think we can also try ourselves maybe to use different tools or start using other platforms to kind of break the power of the big tech. And then there are also many other tools out there that kind of guide also or could guide us to be more inclusive when we are in the digital sphere. For example, what really helped me when COVID started is a toolkit. It's called How to Facilitate Feminist Meetings. So it's really about, okay, if we have a Zoom meeting, how can this be more inclusive? What should we be aware of, etc. And I think that's been really great. And I think there are also a lot of other examples out there. And then just another thought I had is also, I mean, with young people who kind of grew up very differently with digital tools. I think when I think about myself, I mean, I think my first phone I had when I was 14. So I still know like how it is without, but I can also imagine it's quite like difficult to not consider it as a part of your life if you kind of grew up with it. I mean, I already see 6-year-old with mobile phones, for example. So it would also be interesting to do a bit of a scenario exercise with like young people. And so what does the future look like for them, and what kind of role does digital tools play in this world? And maybe this could also help to frame a bit, okay, what is then the framework, or what role do they see? So this would be, I think, also a very interesting exercise to hear from them what they think and what does a democratic, sustainable system for them mean.
Thank you very much. We added quite some points to our bullet point list, but it's super. Huh? Different tools to fight the power of big tech, more inclusive in the digital domain. So, for instance, the toolkit, How to Facilitate a Feminist Meeting, thinking with young people about the future, how the future would look like for them. So I would now maybe give the floor to Chris to add something more to this list and to make this discussion more concrete in the end, please.
Yeah, I think it's very true what Kati says, and I'm in school now, and I was had to teach, and there's like in their early 20s, these people, and I asked them who does not have a smartphone. Of course, nobody raised their hand; they all have a smartphone. And then I asked, do you feel you're addicted to it? Would you rather not use it? And how many of you? And there were a lot of people who know that they actually have a problem. So I think there is a kind of chance to make these kids aware of the fact that they can actually live without these technologies, and try to stimulate this, like everything that is now we using the internet for, you can do it without the internet. And that could be a nice exercise, I think, to make them think like, okay, some application, what is the say the real life version of that, and try to see in how it is different, and probably why it's more fun to do it offline than to do it online. Because, okay, we are all kind of addicted to the screen, but it's really an addiction in the sense of, it's a drug addiction in the sense that we don't really want it. It's not that we are kind of, it's addicted to it. And so, what do you do with a society full of addicts? We need to detox, and that's a bit the challenge, I think. And other points is more what I said already, like, but that's more for not the users, but everyone who publishes. And well, in a way, it's also every one of us is publishing. So before you upload a picture, one is what Gary said, like, do you have to upload 100 images a week? And secondly, if you upload one, you can compress it, for example. That's already because the digital cameras get higher and higher resolutions. But if you now upload a photo to Facebook, it's like 10 megabytes. And 10 years ago, it was half a megabyte. But people are not aware of that. But you can compress the image or use a very old digital camera. And these are small steps you can make.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chris. We added another few points to the list, and then I will pass the floor to Jerry for more ideas, more suggestions, more help to build up this bullet point list that we are going then to share with our audience and the community of the youth workers which are listening to us right now. Jerry, please.
Okay, they're all excellent points so far. I think maybe carrying on from one that Chris raised earlier about lightness, the lighter, the better. Really think about digital weight, whether it's an image or a document. I saw this study which said the lightest form of digital communication is the text message. And young people used to be brilliant at text messages. So if you want to be the most environmental, start texting again. And even this video meeting, if we did this by audio, if we had started for the first 5 minutes with video and then had gone to audio, we would have saved 95% of the waste and the energy consumption in connected with this. So getting into good behaviors, like maybe, when the speaker is speaking, they go to video, but does everybody need to be on video all the time? It's 90 to 95% more energy intense than audio is. And looking at those scales, 8K cameras, you can't see the difference. The eye can't see the difference from 2K upwards in a relatively small screen. So we're not even adding anything other than unnecessary weight in the actual process. So that sense of really trying to be as light as possible. And as one of the other speakers said, don't do digital, get a detox day and do activities, get away from digital. We don't need it for everything. Digital is amazing, but to solve the climate crisis, we actually need less digital, not more digital.
Thank you, Jerry. And this is going as well in our bullet point list. So I guess that's, we're not getting any more comments apart from what I already shared with you. So I would maybe call it a day for this discussion, which was very lively and very interesting. And then I would maybe already take advantage to introduce our next appointment with our audience. We should have a slide to promote our next panel session, ready to be shared. Here it comes. So the next meeting will be next year. So we stop for the winter holidays, and then we meet again on January 31st, always 1 p.m. CET, to talk digital well-being with more guests. So make it a date and don't be late, as they say. And of course, we want to thank our guests for the day, Chris, Kati, and Jerry. And before saying goodbye to you all, let's see if we can have at least a sneak peek to what Dace has produced so far for her graphic recording. Yes, perfect, here it comes. So this is elements, notes, and points from the discussion of the day. And of course, this will be shared and accompanied by some more details about the discussion, so that we can reach out to more people and spread the message to a wider audience. Yeah, everything is there, right? To repair, make repair cool, and the generation of digital waste, and so on and so forth. Thank you very much, Dace, for the graphic recording as well. And once again, thanks to Chris, thanks to Kati, and thanks to Jerry, our guests for the day. I would say that would be all for this panel discussion about digital sustainability. As we said, see you all on the next one. Next year, January 31st, we will talk digital well-being. For now, it's time to say goodbye. Goodbye, and see you to the next appointment. Thanks again, everybody.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.